like to introduce our speaker. Many of you may be familiar with Jennifer Frick Rupert. She's a longtime professor of biology and environmental science at Brevard College. She also serves as the vice president of, academic affairs, and she's the dean of the faculty. She has spoken for us before. She has given talks at the library. She's always very interesting. She also is the author of several books, which are up here, one of which is on nature in the Southern Appalachian Mountains, which is fascinating. And today she's here to talk to us about the science of leaf change and why we're about to see all the leaves turn imminently among us. So,
all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. It is fun to be back. So I think it was pre-COVID, the last time that I spoke with y'all. I talked with y'all about mushrooms one time. I think I talked about mosses. I don't remember, is this group or a different group too? So my own background is just, I have a lot of interest in the plants and animals and other organisms generally in the Southern Appalachians. And that's what I teach at Brevard College, and have been there now for 25 years, so been around for a long time. Teaching about biology and natural history of this area. So that's my specialty, is the plants and animals of the Southern Appalachians. So I was happy to hear from Mary Ann about a question about like, why do the leaves change color at this time of year? And so that's, I'm not gonna hopefully be too heavily into the science of it, but give you enough of the science that makes it interesting. So we'll see, we'll find out. So if you have questions as I'm going along, I'm happy to be interrupted, but I've also got a place at the very end where we can sit and answer questions too. So either way is fine with me, however you're comfortable. Alrighty.
I have a clicker there somewhere.
There you do, indeed. Sorry.
So hopefully, well,
There we go. All right, so what I'm gonna start talking about is really the small scale aspects of what's going on within the leaves. So with the chlorophyll and its reabsorption, the other pigments that are present in the leaves, and of course the reason that those plants have chlorophyll is because they're utilizing that to make their food through photosynthesis. So I am going to talk to you just a little bit about photosynthesis and how that works. Then I'm going to talk later on large scale, like what's going on within the forest, the structure of the forest community, the different kinds of tree species that are present, the diversity of those tree species. One of the things that I spend a lot of time talking about is biodiversity of our forests. And so that lends itself towards why we have such good fall color. And then I'll tell you a little bit about when that's going to happen in general in the autumn, but also the particular days, because people always want to know, when should I go out there and look for the really beautiful fall color. All right, so to start here, the pictures that I've used are mostly my pictures, except for where you've seen I've taken some from my biology textbook. So I'm crediting my biology textbook for providing you with a color spectrum and a couple of other photographs, but most of the photographs are my own. So hopefully you remember this from grade school, right? The visible colors in the spectrum from red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Roy G. Biv, that's the colors in a rainbow. And those are the colors, the wavelengths that our eyes are attuned to be able to see. But other organisms can see other parts of that wavelength too. They continue on either end. So beyond blue is ultraviolet. So it's this is 400 nanometers. Ultraviolet is about 380 and a little lower. So bees can actually see further down the spectrum. And other organisms, snakes being a great example, pit vipers, our rattlesnakes and copperhead, they can see in the infrared. And those pits, they probably, we don't know exactly, they probably don't make an image like eyes make an image, but they would definitely help an animal be able to tell that there was a warm-blooded mouse ahead of it, and they can strike that mouse even if their eyes don't work, because they can use those pits for essentially seeing. I mean, we're seeing these wavelengths. So at either end, some other organisms can as well. So again, here's that color spectrum showing you those different wavelengths. You can see that the wavelengths get shorter, they're more compressed, so there's actually more energy in a shorter unit down here at this end as you move up towards the infrared area. But what chlorophyll is doing, chlorophyll in the leaves, it's functioning there to absorb the energy in the visible light spectrum, and then use that energy to produce food, to produce carbohydrates. So this is one picture that's not mine. This is a picture of the cells of a plant. It's a moss leaf, so because moss leaves have a single layer of cells, essentially. And each of those little circles is a chloroplast. Those chloroplasts are packed with chlorophyll. So that's why you see a green leaf. What you're actually seeing is the chlorophyll that's present in the leaf. And what that chlorophyll does, again, is makes food. So what photosynthesis really is the process I put there that powers all of life on Earth. And so it starts out, it requires carbon dioxide and water, and the presence of sunlight. So sunlight's providing the energy, but it's chlorophyll that's able to utilize that energy. And what it produces is glucose and a byproduct of oxygen. So this is the actual chemical reaction. It takes 6 molecules of carbon dioxide and 6 molecules of water to turn out 1 molecule of glucose, and then the leftover is oxygen. What that sunlight, again, is doing is it's providing the energy that's captured by chlorophyll. And what's captured, if you really want to get into the details of it, I was a biochemistry undergraduate major, and I had to learn all of these different details, the carbon-Benson cycle and all these things that I just don't remember at all anymore. But what it was really about is the movement of an electron. So that's what's being captured in water. What's utilized is the hydrogen ion, so a little H+, right, and an electron. So it splits apart the hydrogen and the electron gets transferred throughout these biochemical reactions, which I'm not going to show you today. All right, so you can thank me for that now. The byproduct, or the product, not the byproduct, but the actual product, glucose, that's a sugar. And what that sugar is used for is growth by the plant, right? So the plant is manufacturing glucose so that it can grow, so that it can flower and fruit. But then we animals, luckily for us, we do not lie out in the sun and gain weight. Unless you happen to also be drinking a beer at the same time, right? Plants are actually growing just from lying in the sun, and we rely on those plants to produce our food for us. So this production of glucose is incredibly important, because all of life on Earth relies on that as a food resource. But the other kind of cool thing is that the byproduct, the extra thing that is produced, is oxygen gas. And oxygen gas is called a biogenic molecule. It is produced by life. Before there were actually blue-green algae on Earth, there wasn't an oxygenated atmosphere. Right? O2 as a molecule was in very small quantities, if at all. So early Earth and most other planets that don't have life are anaerobic, without oxygen. We look for the presence of oxygen in a spectrum around another planet to tell us if there's a possibility that there could be life there. So our life on Earth has changed drastically, initially with the evolution of blue-green algae, cyanobacteria. Those were the first organisms that had chlorophyll and were able to make their own food, and a byproduct of that was oxygen. And as that oxygen atmosphere increased, it actually became poisonous to the early forms of life. So today, there are still some anaerobic types of bacteria that don't use chlorophyll, don't rely on chlorophyll. Do you know where you find them? ideas? Deep ocean, like at hydrothermal vents. So deep in the ocean. Some of them live in animal guts. You don't have oxygenation inside some of the guts. Right? So unusual types of places. Some hot springs. You can find anaerobic bacteria that are very colorful. They're sulfur-based. So there are still a few anaerobic life forms on Earth, but not very many. And the change of life on Earth was really driven by this early oxygenation event. It's even called an oxygenation event. Chemists talk about that a lot in that chip. So do you know about how much oxygen's in our atmosphere right now? 21%. 21%, yep, sure enough.
Very good.
Which again, if you kind of think about that, isn't that kind of weird and surprising? You'd think we'd have a lot more oxygen, right? But about 21%. The rest of it, you know what the rest of it is mostly? Nitrogen. Nitrogen. But nitrogen in the form N2, which is really hard to break apart. So plants struggle with having enough nitrogen, even though most of our atmosphere is nitrogen. And the reason, I'm getting on an aside here, that's kind of a fun story, about nitrogen is N2 like O2, that the bonds in that are so chemically strong that it's very hard to break apart. And what we have that are able to do that are some bacteria, right? Nitrogen fixing bacteria that plants interact with and rely upon. And that's the reason that the NPK, the first thing you put on your garden when you need some fertilizer, is nitrogen. That's most often what's limiting for plants. So that's kind of a fun story, but we can circle back around to that as we move along. So that's me a few years ago in my garden.
Wow.
That was fun. That was a nice garden. All right, so the molecule chlorophyll itself has an interesting story about it. And this is a picture of what that molecule looks like. It is formed of, it's a big molecule, and it has this big circular structure here made up of nitrogens. So this nitrogen ring has a specialized name, it's called a porphyrin ring. But here again is one reason that plants require nitrogen, because it's a fundamental building block for chlorophyll itself. And sitting in the middle of that circle is magnesium. So magnesium is another really important plant nutrient because it builds chlorophyll. All the rest of these things are carbons. There are little hydrogens that are hanging off there and a few oxygens. So carbon and hydrogen and oxygen, those are all readily available through carbon dioxide and water. But the nitrogen and magnesium have to come in through the soil, through those are important nutrients for the plant. And I'm going to talk a little bit about their two main forms of chlorophyll called chlorophyll A and B. So those of you who are chemists are really kind of curious about this. There's this funny little group, it's called R group, and the difference in chlorophyll A and B is that one thing right there, which is CH3 versus CHO, for those of you who are curious about that. Oh, and then this was a reminder that this big, stable, large molecule, there's another one that looks an awful lot like it chemically, which is hemoglobin. It has a nitrogen ring, it has carbon and hydrogen, it has this long carbon-hydrogen tail, but in the center of it has iron instead of magnesium. It's a molecule. So it's just kind of neat how you see all those different connections in nature. And so those of you who are tired of looking at this, I thought I'd put another pretty picture in there too. All right, so bear with me a little bit on the color spectrum. We're going to look at a few spectra of how the chlorophyll actually absorbs that wavelength. And what I tried to do is kind of stretch it out. So here's the wavelengths up here and down here so you can align. I tried to align them as best I could so you can kind of see what colors are associated with those wavelengths. And so what you're seeing here, chlorophyll A is the primary type of chlorophyll. And you see an absorption, so this is the absorption spectrum, 2 peaks. Right here about 450, and again over here about 680. That's where that chlorophyll is absorbing energy. And then chlorophyll B, just by that slight change in the molecule itself, it shifts it in a little bit. So chlorophyll A is kind of out here, 2 absorption peaks, chlorophyll B, and here. Chlorophyll A is the dominant one. But what you'll notice is that I'll ask you, where is chlorophyll actually absorbing most of its energy? Which parts? Kind of in the blues, right? And then up here in the yellows. Where is chlorophyll not absorbing any energy? In green. Chlorophyll is green because it reflects back what it can't use. So isn't that itself kind of cool, right? You'd think chlorophyll is green and it's absorbing. It's not absorbing green. It's absorbing at either end or either side of it. So what that means is all of that energy at the green part of the spectrum, the plants can't utilize. So they have accessory pigments. And so here's that spectrum again, with chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B is a different one that I used from a different book. Plants have these other additional pigments, and you can start to see how they're filling in that missing spot in the middle, right? Anthocyanin in particular. Anthocyanin is a reddish color pigment, and it's reddish because it's really absorbing heavily right in the green area and then reflecting back some red and kind of some blue ends. Beta carotene because it's orange. The reason it's orange is because it's absorbing nothing in the orange. It's absorbing down here more in the blue. So carotenoids and anthocyanins are two big groups of accessory pigments. Keeping in mind, chlorophyll A and B are still the dominant ones, right? But plants build in these accessory pigments, and you don't see those accessory pigments initially because chlorophyll is so dominant. But what they're doing is those accessory pigments are helping to round out the absorption of all that useful energy that's going unutilized. So the colors, and I'm just reminding myself here, when you start to see the fall colors, what's happening is chlorophyll is starting to be broken down. That huge molecule, it's a waste to just let that go away. So the plant starts to break that down to reabsorb it, and as it's reabsorbing that, you're starting to see the fall colors get revealed. And those fall colors are those accessory pigments. So thinking again about those accessory pigments, the sap of plants, you can kind of think about sap as almost like blood, right? It's the liquid that's in the phloem tubes that moves up and down the plant. So as it's produced, as the nutrients, as glucose is produced within the leaves, it can be moved to flower buds, it can be moved down into roots, it can be moved into growth. That glucose is moved around, and it's moved around through the sap. But the sap itself can be more or less acidic. And acidic sap produces bright, intense reddish leaves. So think of red maples. Maples have rather acidic sap. And that's one of the reasons they make such bright, vivid colors. But two other examples, sourwood is a great one. Sourwood, its sap itself is not very acidic, so as that anthocyanin is revealed, they're kind of purplish red. You get both ends of the spectrum, the purple end and the red end. And instead of being that crisp, sharp red, I think sourwoods are gorgeous, but they're kind of more purplish red, kind of an added to that. And there are other trees that really prefer less acidic types of soils. Most of our soils around here are acidic soils, but some are a little less acidic, especially when you get into some of our deeper coves. And those coves, when you walk into them, will look yellow because the trees there are trees like hickories and sweet birch, and those prefer less acidic soils. So you can actually get kind of a sense if you're walking in the woods this time of year. If you're in an area where there's a lot of yellow color, that soil is a little less acidic than if you're walking in an area that's intensely red. General rule. So chlorophyll, as I said, is this big molecule. It's complex, and there's an awful lot of it in the plant. So it would be a shame for a plant to just drop off a leaf packed full of chlorophyll. Instead, what the plant does is actually start to resorb it. And so these are some maple leaves that I picked, and you can actually see the chlorophyll is being withdrawn to the petiole to get back into the stem of the plant, right? And just coming in right along the mid veins, pulled back in. So the plant is resorbing it. It also means chlorophyll, being this large complex molecule, that it's actually surprisingly easy to damage the molecule. And it's damaged by cold temperatures. As it gets cold, it starts to break that molecule apart. And sunlight breaks it down through oxidation, just like sunlight can damage and oxidize your skin. It can damage and oxidize chlorophyll as well. And accessory pigments turn out to be antioxidants. So you may even hear about these on the news, right? Eat your antioxidants. 9 times out of 10, they're advertising blueberries. Blueberries have a lot of anthocyanin and make some blue. That's where that color comes from. So the colors that you're seeing, those colors are sort of like sunscreen for plants. And those are being revealed as chlorophyll is being pulled away. So, how do plants know it's time to start resorbing their chlorophyll? What's the information that they're getting? And that's a picture of the graveyard fields. And the initial signal is day length driven. So we're coming up on the fall equinox on September 23rd. Fall equinox is equal day-night length, and after that time, day length is less than night length. And that goes up until December, right? And so at December is the solstice. And December about 22nd or so. That winter solstice is the longest night and the shortest day length. And I always like to celebrate the winter solstice because the day after the winter solstice, there's more sunlight. Turn back towards more sunlight. So about a month after that equal day-night length is going to be generally when the plant recognizes that night length is exceeding day length, and that's the initial signal for the plant itself. That's also associated with decreasing temperatures. It's also associated with, around here, our fall season is usually drier and sunnier than much of our summer when we get summer thunderstorms. So all those things together are adding up. But summer growth really sets the stage for whether or not we're gonna have a good leaf season is dependent on having healthy leaves and healthy trees and having those leaves be packed with chlorophyll. So the happier plants that you have, based on the amount of water that we have, that's what really sets up a good show for us. So one of the reasons that we here in the Southern Appalachians have such reliably good fall color is we have reliably happy plants because of all the rain we get. So all that rain is good for something, and it's good for growing plants and some other things too. So when will the best color show up? Because that's what people want to know. Like, what day is it going to be? I don't know what day it's going to be. But the signal that really makes a difference is a cold snap. And the reason for that, I've already told you, is all about chlorophyll. That chlorophyll molecule gets broken down by cold. It gets broken down by sunlight. And that dry weather also will really concentrate the sap in the plants and intensify the pigments. So this is the picture that I used to start with, but this shows you what a beautiful fall day here in the Southern Appalachians looks like. It's brilliant sky, the sky is clear, there are no thunderclouds on the horizon, it's sunny, it's intense. That's the perfect kind of season for good color show. One of the things that we are aware of here in this area too, I'm thinking about it right now with this big hurricane that's turning off the coast. If we get hurricane force winds coming through in September, that strips off a lot of leaves. And so that leads to a poor show, right? But we haven't had one hit us here too badly so far. Kind of had a little thing kind of move through a little bit. But we haven't been really affected by a heavy hurricane, and hopefully won't be. But that is something that can affect our leaf color. So the best color show is gonna be dry, sunny, cool fall weather, and it's really that timing of the first frost to set it off. And so I would say this year we have a very good chance of having a great color show. But it's gonna depend on when that cold snap hits. And if it doesn't hit until late in the season, so it's been, probably, I remember about 15 years ago now, somebody was talking with me asking about, is it gonna be a good season? And I said, yeah, everything's set up to be a great season, but we didn't have a cold snap until the 1st of November. So everybody was like, God, Jennifer, you told us it was gonna be a great season. And I said, wait, and just wait. But it got to be the 1st of November, and for 3 days, man, it was glorious. It was fantastic. And so I kept saying, see, I told you so, I told you so. But you had to wait. So it could be that if we don't get a cold snap until November 1st, that we don't get magnificent color until November 1st. So I have to be patient. But that timing of the first frost is what sets it up. So which kind of trees and forests produce good fall color? And I want to talk to you just a little bit about our ecological communities, which are here in the Southern Appalachians. Ecological community is a group of plants and animals and other organisms, fungi and other things, that live and interact together. And these type of ecological communities are determined by biotic interaction, so biology, which kinds of trees support other kinds of trees and plants and animals, but also by abiotic, without life factors. So those are things like climate, temperature and rainfall, and soil chemistry and geology. So those things will affect what kind of plants grow in a particular area. And each ecological community usually has what's called an indicator species. And that indicator species is a species that's particularly abundant or maybe even restricted to only occur in that type of an ecological community. And sometimes it's that combination. So there's a forest type that I'm going to talk about in a minute called an oak hickory forest. It's the combination of oaks and hickories that really define that as an ecological community. So one of my favorite field guides is Field Guide to Eastern Forest, Peterson Field Guide series, and this just shows you some of those different forest types. So here we are in the Appalachians, so we have what's called a mixed Appalachian forest, and you'll see that surrounding us are many different forest types. So this pink one, the biggest one, is that oak hickory forest that I just mentioned before, right? So we border the oak hickory forest. But we also border the northern hardwood forest up here in yellow and the southern hardwood forest down here in blue. This pink light area here is called beech maple, so it's a specialized region. And then along the coast here where it's a little drier, that's where am I looking at it? Southern mixed pine oak. So that's mixed pine oak, and this is the northern extent of that mixed pine oak. Then way up here in the top, it's called the boreal forest. So the interesting aspect of the southern Appalachian region is that we have all of these different forest types in different locations. So if you go up on the highest peaks of the southern Appalachian, you will see remnants of the boreal forest. And I just said it, remnants of the boreal forest. That's actually incorrect, right? We in the southern Appalachians are the point from which all of the northern part of the United States was revegetated in Canada, right? We were the refuge during glaciation. So glaciers covered this area up here, and we were the refuge, the seed source from which the rest of that section was vegetated. So you'll hear people, biologists will talk about the remnants of the boreal forest. That's a starting point of the boreal forest for us.
Technically, we're in the oak hickory on that map.
Well, this, yeah,
North Carolina's all.
it should be a little bit out like over here.
Yeah, they never get us right.
That's
They
imperfect.
never get us right.
Yeah, you're right. I should fix that for them, right?
Yeah,
Just color that.
just
Color that in.
color that in.
Yeah. We get everything.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to focus on a few of these different forest types and tell you a little bit more about them. So our mixed forests of the Appalachians, what we're known for is diversity. So I teach a class called biodiversity, and it's about all the different organisms that occur here. And we're really that central complex of all those different forest communities. In addition to those different forest communities, we have a complex type of geology. So within each, as you move around, drive, bike, walk to different areas within our forest, you can change into a different microclimate. So the climate is the amount of temperature and rainfall the area receives. A microclimate is a shift in climate in a small area. So my examples here, if you go from high to low elevation, you'll see a temperature change. So on the same mountain, you'll see a difference in the community types if you're at the top of the mountain or the bottom of the mountain, if that's driven by that elevation or temperature change. The north facing versus a south facing slope has a different amount of sunlight. And so that the south facing slope gets more sunlight and dries out faster. North facing slopes often have a higher diversity because they have more water. They don't dry out as fast. Eastern and western flanks of the mountain ridges around here typically receive different levels of rainfall. And we have river bottoms to sandy ridges, so the amount of water changes within those. So each of those are different examples of microclimates. And since we have these different kinds of complex geology, we also have different supporting mechanisms for the plants and then the animals that rely on them. It's also the case that our mountains are very ancient. So they've been built on many different occasions, but the most recent mountain building event was about 330 million years ago. So 330 million years is a long time. And that stability has allowed time for evolution and diversification. So the vast majority of orchids being a great example. I like to grow tropical orchids. We have terrestrial orchids here too. The orchid family of plants diversified about 65 million years ago. So our mountains are 330 million years old. Orchids as a family about 65 million years old. Right? So
Teenagers.
yeah, teenagers, right? So that stability just allows for a long time. So the first pink lady slipper orchid that there was, those mountains were already old. Right? We also have plenty of water to support life, as you see, daily afternoon thunderstorms, right? We get that rain, and that's a way to support life. And we in the southern Appalachians were unaffected by glaciation. So the big glacier events came in the northern Appalachians, but not down to us. So we have an extremely high diversity of plants, animals, and other organisms. So I have gone around and talked about biodiversity. So this is my one slide for a whole talk on diversity and its causes in the southern Appalachians. So a little bit about some of those different forest types. So again, oak hickory forest is well, they even put us in the oak hickory forest, but is the closest forest type that we have here. And it really is that combination of oaks and hickories. It's considered to have very rich soil typically with moderate rainfall and temperatures. And I just listed out some of the different kinds of plants. So lots of different oaks, whether it's red oak or chestnut oak or scarlet oak or white oak, lots of those. Hickories, many different kinds of hickories. This is the forest type in which the American chestnut was dominant. It is no longer, it still exists, but is not any dominant. Most common shrubs are blueberries and laurels. So this is again a picture up at Graveyard Fields, thinking about blueberries. Lots of different wildflowers, and the animals that are dominant are the ones that eat nuts. So lots of squirrels, chipmunks, blue jays, turkey, passenger pigeons, formerly again, we're really reliant on this oak, hickory, and chestnut type. And then we have some other kind of interesting birds in there too. The northern hardwood forest is really that transition forest between the boreal forest and the oak hickory and the beech maple. And that's, again, something that we see very commonly around here. And if you, the different types are yellow birch, sugar maple, and American beech. So you see that combination of those different kinds of plants. But hemlock and white pine are also one of those characteristics of additional trees that are part of this northern hardwood forest. So again, it's a diversity of tree types, but that combination of tree types is really what defines this particular kind of ecological community. Now, within this yellow birch, sugar maple, and American beech forest, If you get into a region where there's a higher concentration of sugar maple, and as you go further north, it tends to be more concentrated sugar maple, then you can also get spectacular fall color, but it's related to a single plant type, right? And our diversity here is much more broad. It's many different color types, but that's why you can go up to Vermont. People love to go to Vermont and do, you know, tours and see beautiful color, and it's being primarily driven by a single tree species, which is sugar maple. Shrubs, mountain laurel, striped maple, hobblebush, all kinds of wildflowers like trilliums and lady slipper orchids and wood lily. Those are all different characteristic plants in a northern hardwood forest. Northern junco and purple finch, some of the birds that we see, white-throated sparrows. So northern hardwood type. But the Cove Forest, the Appalachian Cove Forest, is a unique forest to the Southern Appalachians. So we have these Appalachian Cove Forest here that no one else has. And the indicator trees are two, Carolina silverbell and white basswood. So that forest type occurs nowhere else. So only in the Southern Appalachians you can see that. And in addition to those two, these are the two indicators. You get a lot of other trees, tulip trees, yellow buckeye, Fraser magnolias. It's really common in an Appalachian Cove Forest to have 20 or 30 species of tree right within that forest type. And that's the highest diversity in North America. Not in the tropics. If you go to the tropics, you're gonna find more tree diversity, more plant diversity, because it never freezes. So you have an opportunity for greater diversity. But within North America, those Appalachian Cove Forests are more diverse than anywhere else. Shrub diversity is also similar. Rhododendron, azaleas, mountain laurel, and blueberries. Lots of different shrub types. Extremely diverse. I'm going from diverse to high diverse to extremely diverse. I'm trying to, how many more descriptors can I use? But extremely diverse herb layer. So mayapples, trilliums, violets, ginseng, lots of different kinds of plants there. Over 1,500 species. Our warbler species are incredibly diverse. Hooded warblers, sort of characteristic of the Appalachian Cove Forest, but other birds and water thrushes. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention our salamanders. Around here, we have about 30 species of salamanders, which is the higher diversity than anywhere else on Earth. There are more salamanders in the Southern Appalachians than anywhere else, and they're in this Appalachian Cove Forest. So we get a lot of plant diversity, but that plant diversity does support diversity of organisms, other types of organisms, animals too. So our local leaf color, right, is usually good, reliably good, I would say, and sometimes can be fantastic. And so what leads to that good fall color, reliably good fall color, is diversity in the species of trees that we have. Different tree species are going to be affected by different conditions. And so whatever those conditions are, if it's a little drier, some trees will do better. If it's a little wetter, other trees will do better. So having a high diversity lends itself to a good fall color. We get different colors mixed together. So I like that picture where it's red and yellow and green and pink, all those different colors kind of mixed together. We get diversity in elevation and habitats. So if you go up a mountain, you're going to see change in color faster than if you are down in a valley somewhere. Colder ridge or warmer southern slope. Somewhere is going to have perfect fall conditions, so it doesn't matter what day you actually get out there. But as long as you get out there and travel around, you're going to see some good fall color. So October into early November, drive up higher earlier in the season, stay down lower later in the season. But really watch for those cool, sunny, dry fall days that set the stage for whether or not the color is going to be great. And if we have an early first frost, it'll come a little earlier. And so, I believe that's it. So I'm happy to answer some questions for you for a little bit. No quizzes. I don't give quizzes. Question?
So some of the trees that change color seem to be doing it. For me, I know when the sourwoods start turning, we're getting close. But that doesn't necessarily change because of a first frost. So is that because of an acidity level that they seem to change much sooner than most?
Yeah, so, another tree that changes very early around here is, dogwood. And I didn't mention those in particular, but dogwoods are starting to change right now. And the reason that dogwoods are changing right now is because their fruits are ripening. And that tree presents what's called a foliar flag, so that migrating birds see the whole tree in the landscape. That red, I showed a picture of a sourwood tree. Sourwoods do this as well. They turn much earlier because they've got fruits that birds want to eat, and they're trying to advertise to those birds because the fruits are small, but the tree itself is sort of like the
Here we are.
eat sign.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of those big eat signs on the interstate as you're driving down. That's what that is. And so that's what those early transitions are about. So sourwood is a good one, and dogwood's another one. Question?
Is there a chemistry trigger for fruits to be specific colors then? Can you relate any of the leaf color to what's gonna happen to the peculiar fruits for each variety?
I would say that what happens within our fruit is as the fruit ripens, the chemistry of the fruit changes. So that's even the case where there are fruits that are poisonous when they're green are not poisonous when they're ripe. And that's I mean, you're breaking down a poison. The poison itself, the chemical that's present, gets broken down within the fruit. So mayapple is a good example. Mayapple fruits, theoretically, I've never tried one because it gives me the freak to know that the plant itself is poisonous, but the fruit is edible. Once it's ripe, but don't eat it. The chemistry in those fruits does change. I don't know if I'm really answering your question or not, but the chemistry in the fruits does change, and it's associated with the ripening process. Yes?
So for an evergreen, is the color spectrum lacking in certain areas since they stay green all the time?
Well, that's interesting. So, and evergreens are a little tricky because you know this, right? Evergreen trees will still drop their leaves, but they drop their leaves after they've already regrown the next one. So they're a year behind the cycle. So you have to rake up pine straw in the fall of the year, or if you've got a magnolia tree. I'm looking at my husband who hates our magnolia tree because it drops leaves constantly, but it has beautiful flowers too. So it's a love-hate relationship, right? So those leaves drop off there as well. And most of those, most evergreens, rhododendron's another good example, will have some pretty leaf color on them, some brilliant yellow color. But they typically don't have very many of the anthocyanins. They have more of the carotenoids in them, so they're yellow color. So you'll see yellow color in those leaves. And they do have fall color, but the tree itself is kind of blah because it's not all yellow. It's mostly green and half yellow. And then people were, then you're kind of like, is it sick? Is something going on? Yes.
Tulip poplars, sometimes, some years they just go to ground and it's just, we don't get any benefit of that. Is there something about those?
So the question is about tulip poplars, and tulip poplars, they'll have like a blink of yellow, and then they go brown. It's really pretty fast. And tulip poplars are in the magnolia family, and magnolia plants are, that whole family of plants is kind of, it's intermediate between gymnosperms and angiosperms. So gymnosperms are pine trees, right, and conifers. And if you look at a tulip poplar seed, it looks like a little cone, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of relationship that's more similar. So the wood type and the biology of the magnolia family as a group, including tulip poplars, is not as pretty and not as dramatic as other angiosperms. So part of the reason that they're kind of boring color is because their color is more like a conifer's color than like a maple's color. So they're a weird group of plants. So tulip poplars, yeah, they're not spectacular, but they do their thing. But I agree with you. Sometimes they just turn brown. They don't even Usually it's a pretty yellow and you get yellow for like a day and then it's gone.
That's interesting.
But they also they're not very acidic either. So they get a lot of damage. Their tulip poplar leaves get damaged a lot by insects because they don't have a lot of other chemicals in there to dissuade grazing. And so, again, those other chemicals are accessory pigments and other things, and they just don't have all of that. So that's what part of the reason they're
I'm just gonna keep asking questions. Somebody else did. But, another one that tends to just go very early, go brown and fall off is the ornamental cherries. We get questions about that quite a bit, and I know they're not native, but why do they do that? Why do they just all of a sudden crash in the beginning of August when everything else is still green and they have no color?
I don't know. I do not know why ornamental cherries drop leaves so early, but that's a good reason not to plant them. They're not
The reason
native,
is
they're
they're
not native.
invasive.
I live in Deer Lake and there's a Meadows area that has the cherry trees that are old now. And they look old and they're not in good shape. And there's been discussions about cutting them down and replanting new cherries or something. If we don't put cherries back there, what would you recommend?
Ooh, I'd plant one of everything. What's my recommendation for what kind of trees to plant back? So that's always gonna be my answer, which nobody else will be interested in. But I love the diversity of different plant species. So I like to plant as many different kinds of trees as possible. Some that are, some that are slow growing, but some that are quick. So you have some fast moving trees, and then having a few, I don't know, old American beeches in there. It takes them a long time to grow, but they'd be beautiful in 100 years from now. So somebody would thank you for that.
I'm not gonna worry about that one.
So it just sort of depends on, what your style is like. So, yeah, I encourage people to plant a diversity of local species. That'd be great. I'm happy to just continue one more question, and then I'm happy to continue answering questions up here, so you can come up and do that, because we're getting close on time, and I want to respect your time. And I also brought some of my book, Mountain Nature. This is the book that I wrote, that I was talking to somebody up here about. So it's got some of the pictures in there that you saw today. And I wrote this book because I would take my students out to class, and I would carry with me a book that was on wildflowers, and a book that was on trees, and a book that was on birds, and a book that was on butterflies, and a book that was on larvae, and all these different things. I got tired of lugging around all these books. So I said I would really rather have a book that was written seasonally, so that when you go out in the fall of the year, what should you expect to see? And so that's how I wrote the book about the Southern Appalachian. So you know that in the fall of the year, right, you're gonna go out there and you're gonna see leaves changing colors, and there's gonna be monarchs migrating, and the woolly bear caterpillars are gonna be moving around all over your place. And that's when these great big spider webs show up that everybody's asking me about, nursery webs, spiders. So that's how I structured this book, was to be written in the seasons versus written around one particular area. And then a couple of my other books that I wrote there too. So I've got those books for sale if you're interested. Happy to do that. So I promised you a question.
Yeah, circling back to the tulip poplar, I understand that it's probably one of the most common insect pollinated trees in the Southern Appalachians.
Yep.
Is that why, what you just finished saying about the tulip poplar being mostly infected by or damaged by
It's
insects?
grazed a lot by insects.
Is that why? Because of the, is there?
I would say that's different. So tulip poplars are insect pollinated, but so you'll see honeybees on them. I don't know if you can taste the sap. If you take the flower, I mean, it's sweet. You can really taste that, and it's fine, and it won't harm you. So they're being pollinated by those insects, but they're also, tulip poplars are grazed. So you see a lot of caterpillars and other types of insects that are chewing up the leaves. So I encourage you this time of year, if you're walking around, pick up a tulip tree leaf. 90% of them are damaged. Like they're chewed up because they've been consumed by the larvae. So I would say that's two different things going on. The adult insects are pollinating it, gathering pollen and nectar, but the larvae are then chewing on that. And so those those are two different things that are going on, and the reason that the larvae are on there is because there's not a lot of other kinds of chemicals that are in the plant to dissuade them, to prevent them from chewing on there. But does that make the sap different? The sap is different, so there, any kind of plant, so milkweeds are a great example, right? Milkweed, flowers have nectar in them that anything can eat. But the plant itself has got chemicals in it that only monarch caterpillars can chew on, and a few other milkweed specialists. So there are poisons that are in that plant that only a few animals can detoxify, but the nectar and the pollen itself is perfectly fine. Anybody can eat that. So kind of two different things going on.
It makes a great honey also, the tulip poplar makes a really dark.
Yeah, it's dark,
molasses,
sweet
yeah.
honey. Mhm.
That's good.
Yep.
The flower is so pretty when it falls on the ground.
The flower is beautiful of a tulip poplar. Yep, I agree.
And what can you do with that? Can you preserve those and make jam and jelly and?
I don't know, that's a great question. Could you preserve some of the tulip poplar? I don't know. Make tulip poplar, I mean, honey is good, so maybe you could. Curious about that.
Is there a section in your book about poisonous plants? I have this issue that happens to my dog I can't remember it, every couple of years, maybe in the spring and something, just recently, the dog is like drugged. I mean, she's like 110 colors or what's going on? She does all that. And I thought, there's something, we live in, the Bryson City area of Ohio. And so there's something around there, but I have no idea how to identify it, other than that baneberry, I can tell that.
Yeah, there are many different poisonous plants and mushrooms that animals can get into and will eat and will affect them, and the dogs in particular. So I have information that's on poisonous plants, but I don't like cover all the poisonous plants. It was mostly just things, to tell my students, do not eat that. I always have one of those that's in the class, so, can I eat that? Can I eat that? So the answer to that is always no, but then there are some poisonous ones. So I've got some poisonous information in there, but not a lot. All right, well, I'm happy to answer some more questions, but it's time for y'all to go.